I was at home making dinner on a regular night after work. It was around 7 p.m., or maybe even later, and I'd gotten home from work only an hour before. I wasn't making anything fancy, just a small chicken breast and some frozen corn. I had just finished with the chicken and began draining the water from the corn when a light scraping sound came through the house. It was short and quick, and not very loud, but the strangeness of the sound made me flinch a little. I continued doing what I was doing, thinking it was just some weird sound that the house was making that I just never heard before. But then again, that same scraping sound vibrated through the walls. It was such an unusual sound. I had no idea what to think of it. I quickly finished plating my food, then went toward the front door to listen for it again, hoping to pinpoint where it was coming from. I waited for maybe 30 seconds, not hearing anything, then went back to the table to eat. Even still, at this point I wasn't thinking anything of it. I was only curious as to why the house was making that sound, but I wasn't worried in the slightest. I spent a few minutes eating, then went over to the couch to rest and watch some Netflix for a bit. But through the show, I would constantly hear that obnoxious scraping sound over and over. Eventually, it was just getting so aggravating that I turned off the TV and just waited, listening. When the sound came again, I was able to hear it more clearly, coming from somewhere upstairs. I quickly walked up to the second floor, still just annoyed at the house for ruining my night, but also a bit more concerned that there may actually be something wrong with the house. At the top of the steps, I stayed in the hallway, waiting again for the sound. A whole minute went by of nothing, so I began searching the rooms to make sure everything was okay. It didn't seem like anything was unusual or broken, so now I was starting to really get confused and worried. I put some shoes on and went outside, and while it was dark, I figured I'd maybe be able to see a tree scraping against the house or possibly some other issue. I went to the side of the house where I knew there was a tree, but it wasn't windy at all, and the branches were nowhere near the side. I kind of just stood there, wondering how this was happening and why it suddenly started tonight. I was tired and this was the last thing I wanted to be doing. I walked back around to the front of the house, and on my way to the front door, a glimmer of light came in the side of my vision. I turned and looked as it seemingly came from the front of the house. I walked further down the driveway by the sidewalk and looked back, and that's when I saw a small light coming from one of the windows in a dark room of my home. After a couple seconds, I realized it was the attic window, and that the light was moving, almost like someone was shining a flashlight around. I was horrified. Someone was in my attic doing who knows what and for how long. I stayed out front, calling the police as I stared at the window, watching the light move around slowly. But as I was talking on the phone, the light got dimmer before shining directly at me. They held it there for a couple seconds, then shut it off, and even from outside, I was able to hear a few loud thuds. I immediately ran over to my neighbor's yard, trying to explain to the operator what was going on while looking over at my house in terror. From where I was, it looked silent and calm, but that only made it more scary knowing that something awful was likely going on inside. After a few minutes though, nothing else was seen and the cops finally made it. They searched the house first, then brought me inside to talk. They found multiple shoe prints in the attic, and they suspected it was likely a group of teenagers messing around with me and likely not trying to cause any harm. There were no signs of anyone living there or anything, which was a relief. They found some carvings in the wooden beams though, but they weren't anything specific, just lines basically. Again, the cops assured me that the kids were probably just messing with me and trying to get a reaction out of me. As for how they got in, they think they may have somehow gotten on the roof and climbed in through a window while I was at work that day. However, they exited through the attic doorway on the ceiling and got out through my back door. I know they said confidently that it was just a harmless group of kids, but that doesn't make me feel any safer knowing that some random group of people broke into my house and was camping out there all day and at night while I was home. It is really unnerving. I mean, those cops didn't actually know what the group's intentions were either, so who knows what they actually planned on doing.